Even if a large amount of infant dragons had not hatched during Ledandor's funeral the previous evening, the many nobles and servants living in the palace in Dylamore would still be a mix of busy and optimistic, for today was none other than Moving Day. The young Prince Valaris was now being called king, even though his coronation wouldn't be for another week, a fact he genuinely resented. It was not that he did not want to rule, far from it considering the alternatives, but rather that he had heard the title used for his father so much that he could not easily separate the two in his mind, almost as though everyone were calling him Ledandor. Ledandor. What would he have to say about all of this? The old king had founded Vaerenth and ruled for almost a century. Now he was gone, and by no hand but Valaris's. Nobody knew exactly how he had passed on, save for Valaris and his mother, but he took no joy in killing his own father. The venom with which Ledandor had been cut would keep him alive, but in excruciating pain and unable to move or speak. Was that a state in which he could rule? Could live? Ledandor couldn't have decided those for himself, and his mother was too stricken with grief, so Valaris did with his dagger. Now he was reaping that which he had sown, and the only way to keep his mind off his sins was to focus on the task at hand. The upper floors of the palace were lively with the sounds of change. Since Valaris was due to be crowned, he was to move into Ledandor's old room. It was not so simple a matter as to just start sleeping there, because to do so would mean sleeping in Ledandor's bed, using Ledandor's desk and Ledandor's wardrobe. No, Valaris had asked his servants to move Ledandor's things out and his own things in. There was no need to remove his mother's furniture, as she had relocated into Prince Colin's room after his disappearance. Not out of grief, as any love for Colin within the royal family was already long gone, but because she had come to understand that she is the type of person who needs her space, and Ledandor, surprisingly, was happy to accommodate those needs. The other nobles would certainly gossip and speculate about this change, but at the end of the day, it was truly none of their business. Valaris placed his hands on the back of Ledandor's desk chair and blankly gazed at the workspace. How many times had he seen his father there, his quill dancing across the page with conviction? He must have written 1,000 decrees at this desk. In the centre, where the parchment would rest, the scratches of decades' worth of writing remained scrawled into the wood. Had any of it ever been written for himself? A small crack existed on the exterior of the desk, where a very small Valaris had once hit his head during a game of hide-and-seek. The day after, at breakfast, Ledandor announced that his room would be off-limits when children play in the palace. Valaris let out a weak smile at the memory. Ledandor had been a good king, and a better father. He hoped that he would be able to achieve the same balance, as the life of the prince was difficult enough on its own. Moving on from the desk, he now found himself sitting at the end of Ledandor's four-poster bed, with his eyes fixated on the wardrobe, and his feet resting on the trunk at the foot. The wardrobe, of course, contained many, many outfits Ledandor had worn over the years. There were also some assorted items on the top shelf, such as a dagger that Prince Colin had given Ledandor as a birthday gift long ago, a maroon scarf with colourful beads sewn into it, an old pair of braces that had clearly been worn many times, and a strange twisted horn that, in his adulthood, Valaris could now recognise as having once belonged to a dragon. Valaris decided he'd add his own clothes to this wardrobe, instead of replacing the contents entirely. Ledandor's old outfits might be a bit too large for him, but he decided he'd grow into them. He'd have to if he wanted to emulate the old king. His eyes floated towards the mantel above the fireplace, where he noticed that Ledandor's crown was sitting atop a small cushion. Valaris had tried it on once, but it seemed a little too heavy to keep on his head. He was reluctant to wear it again. The mantle was also home to a book titled The Treatise on the Principles of Ruling, which had been written for Ledandor as a gift from two old friends who passed before Valaris was born. Ledandor had read it so much that it was beginning to fall apart. Above the mantle hung Ledandor's old sword, which he had used for most of his adventuring career, up to and including the defeat of the last bandit lords. Their downfall had finally made the land stable enough to enable trade routes between Dylamore, then called Ashenwick, and the other settlements throughout. Through trade routes came unity, leading to the entire continent coming together under one banner. On the wall opposite the fireplace, a window existed which overlooked the courtyard, which had likely seen hundreds of activities over the years. Had Ledandor ever stood here, watching the princes and princesses train and play, thinking over which one should be handed the crown? Opening the window, Valaris knew he would when it came time for him to have children of his own. Even now, his brother, Prince David, sparred with one of his squires, whose name was Bran or Dan or something. Valaris couldn't recall, but made a mental note to learn it later. The smack and clatter of wooden swords rang throughout the courtyard, even carrying up to the window. He could easily hear the boys laughing and clearly having fun with David's training, even to the chagrin of Sir Jacob, whose countenance betrayed thoughts of disappointment. Valaris decided that he had now reminisced long enough, so he left the room to find Elmer waiting in the hallway. The elderly man had the same signature pointed ears as all wood elves, and had served the royal family as Ledandor's steward for so long that they all considered him an honorary member. "You can tell the rest to start moving father's things out now," Valaris told him. "But leave the wardrobe.